Look, I'd like to spend a little bit of time walking you through Zelda Therapeutics. We're a reasonably different company to the cannabis space in a couple of ways. One you may hear from my accent, I'm actually Australian, so we are ASX listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, and the second thing is we're really focused on clinical trials and the medical use of cannabis. So in terms of the overview of the company, we were formed late last year. We went through a stock exchange listing late last year and raised 4 million Australian at that point. And that was at 2.5 cents to come on at a market capitalisation at the moment of about 20 million Australian. That's about 15 million US. So there's a good lot of upside in our market capitalisation and valuation at the moment. We've got enough cash to do these initial trials, which I'll walk you through, and it's fairly tightly held in terms of the management and top 20, the stock in the company. So in terms of an overview, even though we're listed in Australia, Zelda Therapeutics, we actually spun out of a company in the United States, which some of you may have heard of, called Zelda's. Zelda's was formed about 5 years ago in California, and treated a lot of patients for cancer and Crohn's disease and pretty severe indications that they treated there with medicinal cannabis. The really cool thing about Zelda's is they actually fixed their formulations early and whole spectrum plant extracts and recorded the patient data. So they have a very, very valuable data set of hundreds of patients. Zelda Therapeutics was the spin-out of that, which took all of that patient data and owns that exclusively worldwide now to perform clinical trials. So this really gave us the ability to go straight into a phase 2 clinical trial, or a phase 2 clinical trial as an efficacy trial, meaning does it work against that disease, how well does it work against that disease, rather than the safety studies that usually start with a new medicine. Once we do these clinical trials, we'll be looking at partnering these with larger biotechnology companies or pharmaceutical companies or marketing companies that will take these products and medicines through to market. In terms of the board and management team, myself on the right there, I'm a founder of the company alongside Harry Corellis and Mara Gordon. I've got now near on 30 years actually of CEO board experience. I'm a scientist by training, immunologist, and in medicine as well. And now, more recently, I've been working in stem cells. And stem cells is a very interesting area. It's where we basically take these living cells, which we're not quite sure how they work, but as long as we make them the same every time and get the batch consistency, we can do clinical trials on those and make very valuable medicines. A whole range of cardiac diseases, autoimmune diseases, and other things. Our approach to cannabis is very similar. Where stem cells is red gloop in a tube, this is green gloop in a tube. As long as we make it the same way every time, validate those batches, and run clinical trials on them, we have a potentially very valuable medicine. Harry Corellis on the left, he's been in the biotechnology industry for a long time. I've worked with him over the course of about 10 years, and very successful deal maker in merger acquisition as well. Mara Gordon is the co-founder of Zelda's with her husband Stewart, and she's the one person who's really pulled all this together in terms of the medicines and patient data sets. Jason Peterson is also another founder of the company and a very successful broker and investment banker down here in Australia. Now these guys are very important. This is the medical advisory board, a scientific advisory board as we've written here, and these are the who's who of the scientific industry overseeing cannabis. Manuel Guzman and Cristina Sanchez are two of the world leaders in medicinal cannabis, and actually some of the first that found that it may have an effect on cancer itself rather than just the side effects of cancer treatment and chemotherapy. And they've published widely and in very world-leading journals, even Nature published. And these two are at the University of Complutense in Spain. So Spain really led the world while we dropped the ball in the rest of the world. Spain and Israel continue to advance scientifically and medically with cannabis. Joe Goldstreich there, he is a doctor who is an absolute legend. He's evaluated over 3,500 patients in the US using cannabis as a medicine, and his career spans a long time, but a very prestigious career in cardiology and nutrition. He was actually there in the intern suite when JFK was actually assassinated. So he was one of the interns at that event. So he's had a very long, distinguished career right through. Noah Federman on the right, Dr. Noah Federman, is the head of the UCLA Clinical Trials Unit and the sarcoma program, these rare, terrible type of cancers that plague children particularly in their muscles and bones. He's the world leader in this area in the pediatric bone and soft tissue sarcoma program. And he's working with us. He's got his cancer patients have been treated with medicinal cannabis for side effects of nausea and that on their chemotherapy. And he has seen some very positive effects in some of his patient sets in terms of their tumor progression as well. That's not a clinical trial in itself, but it was enough for him to say, well, let's do a proper clinical trial and look at this in a more detailed way. So he's now, we're very happy to have him on our medical advisory board. So the milestones achieved since listing. It's been a busy few months. Late last year, our ASX listing, I raised the money there, the $4 million. And soon after that, out of the University of Complutense program, we got a positive result on our breast cancer study. Now, this is not a human study. This was a preclinical study. And I'll talk a little bit about it because it is a bit of one of the world first where we've seen a positive response against breast cancer using medicinal cannabis. We've also initiated a cancer study, a brain cancer study with a group here in Australia called the Telethon Kids Institute. They're a well-regarded, internationally well-regarded institute with some of the leading medical guys and clinicians. And they'll be doing a brain cancer study with us, which will be a preclinical study. We're also initiated a trial, which we're just going through ethics committee approval at the moment, for insomnia and sleep disorders. So this will be a human clinical trial, and that will be run in Australia, and we're looking at other sites internationally for that clinical trial as well. And finally there, we're also looking at pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer, if any of you have been unfortunate enough to have any family members or friends with this type of cancer, would know it's a particularly aggressive form of cancer and usually fatal in a fairly fast time frame. So it's a nasty one and a good one for us to look at. So this is another preclinical study where we're looking at our medicines against that pancreatic cancer cell lines. So about medicinal cannabis, one of the biggest things here internationally that happened over the last month was the American National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, who are the world leading think tank in medicine and science, actually came out and said there is actually conclusive evidence that medicinal cannabis does work against certain ailments. They included pain and childhood epilepsy in that, and said that other diseases such as insomnia and cancer remediation are interesting but need more clinical data or preclinical data to validate those things. So it was a very positive leap forward for the medical community and scientific community to have that international independent validation. In terms of regulatory, the United States, of course, has been one of the leaders at the state level, but not so much at the federal level, still lags behind. Other countries like Canada and Australia and Chile, Germany recently, are actually now got clear legislation at the federal government level, which allows us to use our federal regulators to make approved medicines for patients. And all medically driven. You need clinical evidence that it works in that disease before you can prescribe, or a doctor can prescribe these medicines in those countries. The public perception has changed a lot US has been a thought leader in public perception, and I see you've embraced it in most of your states now, which is wonderful to see. The rest of the world has been fairly conservative, but the good thing is the public perception has shifted very much towards medicinal cannabis. And actually the Australian Parliament, it was one of the only pieces of legislation that went through the lower house and the upper house unanimously on all sides of Parliament. So the public perception is very strongly behind medicinal cannabis. Uses of medicinal cannabis. There's a broad range of diseases that we've seen that we could go after with medicinal cannabis. The top ones there's actually products coming through from GW Pharma and other companies, and of course Cannabis Growth Corporation in Canada, in terms of pain, post-traumatic stress disorder, spasticity and multiple sclerosis, and these childhood epilepsies, which are particularly nightmarish diseases. But the list below is really where there's more data required, but it has a really good potential against chemotherapy-induced nausea. Zelda has been treating patients with that for a long time. The sleep disorders, the dermatology side, including eczema, anxiety, weight loss in HIV/AIDS patients, the wasting, getting people to eat again and stop being so nauseous, and of course going after cancers themselves. This is a big important area, and one thing we're particularly looking at alongside the sleep disorders, motor neuron disease and others that are in this list as well. Look, it is a wonderful product potentially for medicine. It's not going to cure every disease, but we've got a good chance at going after some pretty severe diseases. In terms of how medicinal cannabis works, I'm sure most of the people on this call are probably industry experts, so I might be telling you all the things you know very well here. The cannabis contains a lot of these things called cannabinoids, so when we all know about THC, CBD, but there's around 85 cannabinoids in the plant, and getting the ratio of these actually changes the effect on the body. The cannabinoid receptors that have been identified, CB1, CB2, make up the endocannabinoid system in humans and other vertebrates, and that's located through the brain, central nervous system, and also the immune system as well in a big way. So we can really look at a range of diseases because of how we hit these different receptors with different medicine profiles from the plant. And these receptor bindings is well known in medicine. What we've got here, but is a very complex medicine, because the plants that were the medicines that work best seem to be these whole spectrum plant extracts rather than single isolated cannabinoids or synthetically made cannabinoids, which don't work anywhere near as well. So in terms of Zelda, we're currently targeting areas with large patient markets. The breast cancer market, which we're looking at, it's a very large market with over 1.7 million patients in 2012. And is the #1 diagnosed cancer in women, and therefore it's obviously on a lot of people's radar in terms of funding and research. Brain cancer as well is a big problem out there, with even in Australia 1,600 brain cancers diagnosed each year, and accounts for nearly 2% of all cancers overall. And of course, what the really sad thing is, it's the leading cause of cancer death in young people. Insomnia doesn't sound like a serious disease, but look, it is. The people suffering from insomnia, and probably a lot of people on this conference would suffer from insomnia. It affects around about 35% of the population in some way, and it's a big market potential. But for the patients suffering from this, of course, lack of sleep drives people crazy, literally. I mean, they lose jobs and their families and things because of sleep deprivation. So it's a particularly bad disease to have. Pancreatic cancer is one of the other big cancers, 12th most common cancer, but a particularly severe one, so that'll be a good one to go after. Glioblastoma is a type of brain cancer. It's a rare disease, but it is the major type of brain cancer. And it's one where there's some evidence, early evidence, that medicinal cannabis could go after it, so we'll be looking at that as well. And eczema is a topical disease, an allergy, which we'll be doing later in the year. So in terms of our anti-cancer results in the breast cancer study, what we did here was took a medicine, which is the Zelda Therapeutic formulation of a THC-rich oil, so it's a whole spectrum plant extract. We know the major cannabinoids in it and the terpene profiles, and what we did was put that head-to-head with just a THC itself, without all the other goodies in it, just to see how we go against that. And also the leading chemotherapy drug, lapatinib, which is the standard treatment for breast cancer. We then did human breast cancer studies in a mouse model. These were HER2 positive breast cancers. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the HER2 positive negative breast cancers, because there is a thing called Herceptin that goes after HER2 positive cancers. That's why we screened that. And what we found is a very interesting thing and a very positive thing for us at Zelda. We found our formulation of THC-rich oil, our medicine, was actually significantly more potent at reducing the tumour growth than pure THC. So this is a significant study and a significant result. But very importantly, it was just as potent, our medicine, as the leading chemotherapy agent without the side effects. So what we're doing now with this is really looking at how our chemotherapy, or how our medicine plays alongside chemotherapy and radiotherapy regimes, and we'll be planning further studies, and are just initiating those right now, to look at HER2 positive breast cancers that don't respond to Herceptin, and also HER2 negative cancers, which of course the prognosis is very bad in. So there's further studies here, but a very, very nice start with our result there. So in terms of our partnerships, Aunt Zelda's is a very important partnership where they obviously gave us all the formulations and protocols and patient data over those 5 years, and continue to be a very active partner. And hopefully as we enter the US market, as the federal government starts to legislate towards it, Aunt Zelda's will be manufacturing and scaling up for us there as well, alongside their current medicines. University Complutense in Spain is doing those preclinical studies in the cancers for us. Telethon Kids Institute, as I said, in the children's brain cancer, the preclinical studies. Curtin University, one of the leading universities, who has actually one of the leading Italian medical cannabis teams residing there, is actually doing the pancreatic work for us. A company, a sister company to Zelda Therapeutics called OzCan, which has got, as its major shareholder, Canopy Growth, will be making our medicines and providing them internationally under GMP, which is Good Manufacturing Practice Standards, which we need for clinical trials. And CDR Med is a software package that Zelda's has developed, which has been finalised and put through dispensaries and medicinal clinics, which will be collecting clinical data from patients. So the competitive landscape, we are a minnow in terms of market size. We have some very interesting programs which we're moving into the clinic this year. And you can see the market caps of Canopy Growth and GW Pharma and others are significant. Canopy Growth is now around about $2 billion actually market cap, so that's increased from when I put this slide together. And GW Pharma sits around $2 billion US, I think $2.5 billion US market cap as well. Now they've got some approved products in these diseases and a good lot of clinical data as well, but they've taken a very medical approach to cannabis. In terms of Australia, it's a very active biotechnology space in Australia with market capitalisations that range all over the place. Mesoblast, one of the bigger ones, with a market capitalisation of 640 million Australian, which is just around about 500 million US. The good thing of here is really the trend says once you start clinical trials, which we will be this year, your market capitalisation and share price increases, and that's exactly what we plan on doing alongside these peers and our international peers. So really what we're looking at here, we've already got this world-class knowledge from Aunt Zelda's, and we're leveraging that. and of course University Complutense knowledge as well. We're advancing into clinical trials straight off the back of this, this knowledge. Cannabis is not a new medicine. It's been around for thousands of years. The Egyptians used cannabis. Ancient Chinese traditional medicines got long documented history of cannabis, so has India. So really what we're doing is reawakening an old medicine using modern testing regimes and formulations. And that, of course, we want a cost advantage against our current pharmaceuticals, which is the antibody drugs and other things we treat these diseases with. I think we can achieve a significant cost advantage out there as well. International relationships is important to us. We will be doing partnering for all of our clinical trials and preclinical work. And we've got a strong patent portfolio covering our formulations and uses. So really this allows us then to go through these clinical trials, put the data packs together and partner with the pharmaceutical or large biotechnology companies. So in terms of the model, I'll script this slide to here. Really this is a standard biotechnology model. We're not inventing anything new in our model. The biotechnology industry exists because pharmaceutical companies are very risk averse at getting into new areas. Cannabis scares them and intrigues them. What biotechnology companies do is at the end of the day pull together the research and trials that the pharmaceutical companies don't want to do themselves, and conduct those studies and then partner with pharmaceutical companies through licenses or partnering things. Licenses generally include an upfront fee of significance if it's a efficacy study like we'd be doing in sleep. So usually in the millions of dollars upfront. Milestone payments as they take it through to market. A lot of these products will not require phase 3 clinical trials. We can go straight to market, which is nice because what Australia has said, and Canada and other markets, Chile as well, is that basically a one good efficacy trial means that you can start prescribing these products. So if you can show safety and some efficacy, you can start prescribing. Unlike other medicines that require these big expensive phase 3 trials, we can go straight through, which is very nice. And of course royalties from the products on market would flow back to Zelda as well. So these licenses and partnerships would make Zelda very valuable in a short order of time as we start doing them. So big pharmaceutical companies, I mean there's a lot of fear and loathing of big pharmaceutical companies, but look, the reality is they do make most of the medicines in the world. I think nutraceutical companies may move into this medicinal cannabis space as well, which will be good to see, and possibly some of the bigger food companies. But look, in terms of the pharmaceutical side, they are huge. They generated over 380 billion US, the top 10 in 2016, and they're cashed up. They're very risk averse and they're very interested in medicinal cannabis, but they really need clinical trial data to move into this field. So the small, nimble companies are obviously able to navigate through the legal spectrum and these clinical trials, and that's exactly what we've done at Zelda Therapeutics. So the Australian opportunity is a good place to run clinical trials. Our regulator is the Therapeutic Goods Administration. Our data produced through that is recognised by the FDA, your FDA, and other regulators, the EMA, and that in Europe, around the world. So it's a very nice place to run clinical trials. And also we get a nice government rebate of about 45 cents in the dollar back on every spend that we do on clinical trials as well. So we can really make our money stretch a long way. Biotechnology did this similar thing in the antibody space, and some of our biggest therapies out there are antibody therapies like Herceptin and the TNF inhibitors. And what they did there was these same clinical trials and then licensed that across to pharmaceutical companies who developed that. In terms of 2017 for Zelda Therapeutics, we've got a lot of things coming up this year. We're really commencing some of these trials is the important thing. Our insomnia or sleep disorder trial we expect to commence mid this year, with trial data expected about 6 months after that. So around the end of this year or early next year, we should have the clinical results from that study, and a very valuable medicine hopefully at the end for insomnia. The pancreatic cancer study has been initiated and will commence any week now. And the breast cancer study, follow-on studies have already started. So we're already starting those studies, looking at the medicines against chemotherapy and radiotherapy and seeing how it works. The brain cancer study also should commence in the next few months at the Telethon Kids. And this eczema clinical trial study we expect to start this year as well. I haven't initiated a trial site for that yet, so I'm looking at that right now and where to do that, and how many patients we want to put in that trial. All these trials are placebo-controlled, which is an important part of clinical trials, meaning that you have the active, which is a cannabis medicine, and also a negative, which is the smells like the cannabis medicine, looks like the cannabis medicine, tastes like it, but it is not got the actives in it. Now this is very important for clinical trials because it takes out that placebo effect, which basically confuses a lot of trials where people feel better if they just believe they're going to get better rather than the action of the medicine. So we'll be expanding to other clinical areas and making some announcements on that later this year as well. And of course partnering and licensing our initial products with bigger companies who can pay us milestones and royalties and also take these products forward to market. So the agreements with contract research organisations run these trials and that are in place, and the licensing agreements of course will be forthcoming. So just to summarise, what we have here is the medicinal cannabis space, as I'm sure you're all aware, is a very, very valuable space. These are large market opportunities, and the world is opening up for these opportunities, but really the world does require clinical evidence outside of the United States. So if you want to sell it in any of those jurisdictions that are approving medicinal cannabis, you need a clinical trial data pack to put alongside your medicine. The Aunt Zelda's data packs, the anecdotal evidence has allowed us to accelerate straight to clinical efficacy trials because we know what formulas have worked in the United States and California. And that's a very valuable thing where we can jump straight into these clinical trials and have a good knowledge of what dosage, what formulation is going to work in that patient set. The large target markets that we're focusing on are important, and really, you know, what we sometimes forget in the industry side, but we do not at Zelda Therapeutics, is that the patient is why we're here at the end of the day. So treating these patients for these terrible disorders is a very critical part of what we're here to achieve, alongside shareholder growth that will occur beyond that. Clear path to commercialisation is there. This is a format I've used. I've done multiple license deals internationally with large pharmaceutical companies and stem cells and other products, and I've also done trade sales to larger biotechnology companies and pharmaceutical companies. The board and management is the right people to take this forward, and particularly our medical advisory board, scientific advisory board, is critical to the process and guiding us towards the right outcome here. And we've hit the ground running. This is a significant progress on the trials that we've initiated, but also that breast cancer result, very positive breast cancer result. And I think the good news is for any incoming investors that want to buy shares is compared to their peers in clinical stage biotechs, we're quite undervalued. And that gives a nice upside from this point going forward. So thanks, Dale, and I'll finish it there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Washer. Do you have a slide with the contact information on there, or?
That would have been useful, wouldn't it? So I'm not sure I do in here, Dylan. I can get that to you. If I think we're in the magazine coming up as well. So
yes, Zelda Therapeutics will be on the cover of the Cannabis Investor magazine next week. I think that magazine will be distributed on Wednesday, U.S. Thursday Australian time. So the
Sure.
first question is, and we got several of these, Dr. Washer.
Sure.
Well, Zelda looks like a great investment opportunity. Any plans to list on the American exchanges?
Yeah, look, that's a wonderful question, Bill. And I think at the moment we've got significant growth potential on the ASX. But one thing we may look at down the future is these ADRs, where you can do these dual listings towards NASDAQ. So it's not a full NASDAQ listing, but it allows people to trade in the daylight hours of the United States and Australian stock. So we may look at that down the track, but I would not say that would happen this year.
Yeah, because I myself tried to purchase some of the stock and even tried to open up an account in Australia. Couldn't do that because I was American.
Really? Well, that's a bit racist of us, isn't it?
I would have to be an Australian citizen. So I looked into ADRs, and you guys don't have an ADR, and you're not listed on any exchanges. But I think, me personally, I think your stock is very undervalued. That's why I took a look at it. So I would love to purchase that stock. So as soon as you can find out about the ADR, let me know, and I'll let out.
We'll do as well as really I'll get some information back to you to disseminate to your audience as well on some of the ways you could buy Australian stock as well. There is brokers that should be able to help.
Yes, so you're right, Dr. Washer. It is depending on your broker. If your brokers can buy Australian stocks, not all brokers could do that, but some can. But if you find a list, let me have that list, because one of the reasons I'm interested in the Australian stock market as far as cannabis is concerned is that our market here is there's been a lot of buying lately into our cannabis market, and so a lot of the stocks are are kind of overvalued, or they've increased significantly. But in Australia, a lot of your cannabis stocks, is not a lot, but a lot of your cannabis stocks are, to me, are undervalued. The excessive buying hasn't went into those stocks yet, like the United States. So those stocks in Australia would be a very good opportunity. So yeah, let us know which firms can buy those.
No, will do indeed.
All right, next question. How do you decide on what ailments to target? Is it solely large patient markets and revenue based?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, Derwin. No, we've actually, because of the Aunt Zelda's data set, really targeting diseases where Aunt Zelda's has had success in California already. Hence the big emphasis on the cancer area, where they've had a lot of success, and the insomnia area, which has been something that everyone sort of inherently knows it works for sleep disorders. But no one's done the proper clinical study. So really what we've taken is the low-hanging fruits here, where we've got a good chance of it working, our medicines, because we either know that from California or rest of world experience, or some of the university competence studies or Israel technologies, which they've seen where it's got a good potential, but no one's actually done the proper definitive clinical trial. So we're really unlocking those initial early ones, and then we'll go further up the tree into some greater risk, but also very valuable areas.
Next question, Dr. Washer. What is your equivalent in Australia to the FDA here in the States? And the second part of that question is, if you get approval in your country, does it make it simpler or easier to get FDA approval here in the United States?
Yeah, so it's a really complex set of legislations the governments have managed to put in place. So what the equivalent here is the Therapeutic Goods Association Administration. It's the TGA, and the TGA definitely, if you get approval there, for most medicines or all medicines other than cannabis, it makes it very easy to get approval through the FDA because they data share. Unfortunately for medicinal cannabis, it's still illegal at federal level in the United States, so you can't get the FDA approval that readily. It's still a Schedule 1 substance, which is in the poisons list, which has no therapeutic value. So I think until the United States reschedules or looks at you know, its approach at federal level, it's going to be hard to get federally approved medicines in the United States. So it's a very unusual situation where you can treat patients state by state, but not with the federal blessing. Where the Australian government has taken a very federal government approach. You need federal approval through the TGA, then a doctor can write scripts out once they become an authorised prescriber for cannabis medicines.
So to be clear, Dr. Washer, is medicinal cannabis legal in the country of Australia?
Yes, yes it is, and also Canada, as you know, and Chile and Germany and other jurisdictions as well, other countries.
Have you guys made any strides on recreational, or that's a long way off?
It's funny, Australians seem to be one of the most conservative species on the planet, which surprised me when I started to travel. No, recreation is really not on the government's radar down here. They're quite paranoid about recreational cannabis, even though I'm sure there is so much recreational cannabis illegally going on in Australia. It's one of those things, there's a disconnect to the federal government. So we have not seen that on the radar at this stage.
Okay. Now, what is the public perception in Australia regarding opioids?
Opioids, did you say?
Yes.
Yeah. So the well, the perception is that in terms of the you mean the opiate drugs, as in pain control drugs?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So what we've really seen is we're getting a lot of deaths in the elderly population, particularly from respiratory failure. The opiates are a useful pain control product, but you know, highly addictive compared to cannabis, and of course they have that danger element and a lot of side effects, gastrointestinal side effects. So the government really does want to see medicinal cannabis come in alongside the opiates for pain control and reduce or remove the opiate use in certain patients. So I think there's a strong emphasis on really combating that opiate problem that we have now.
Okay. Next question. What are the differences between Canadian, Australian, and American R&D clinical trials process? I guess they're asking, you know, is it easier in one country versus another country?
Those three countries are very, very similar in their approach, and that's why they can data share as well, because they believe the data from each other. So really a general process is phase 1 clinical trial is your safety trial. You know, we usually use healthy university students for that trial, and just see that it's safe at a sort of certain dose that they're looking at running in the patients. And then a phase 2 is a smaller trial. Well, it's a small patient trial to see that it works, efficacy, and then phase 3 is a bigger, wider population trial. The nice thing about medicinal cannabis, we can just do a phase 2 trial only. They believe there's enough safety data out there, so we can go into a phase 2 trial where we're looking at the efficacy in the patient, and then straight to market from that as well, which is very good and refreshing.
Next question. Where do you receive your cannabis from that you use for R&D and clinical trials?
Yep, at the moment it will be made by Canopy Growth Corporation, because the Aunt Zelda's medicine can only be used in California. You can't move it through state borders, as I heard the other speaker say. So it will all be produced by Canopy in Canada, which through AusCann, and then eventually AusCann will be making those medicines when it gets its license to grow in Australia, because those medicines can be exported to anywhere in the world.
Next question. Would you be considered as an acquisition candidate for Big Pharma?
Well, absolutely do, and I think Big Pharma generally combats, we see their pattern all the time, they usually say it doesn't work. They did this with antibodies and stem cells. then they start to license, then they acquire. And so Big Pharma is driven by fear and greed. I mean, the greed side means that they want products that they can sell because they've got a pipeline of products which are going off patent. And the fear side is more important for them, meaning they don't want their competitor to own a strategically important asset. I think medicinal cannabis will be a big part of the portfolio for a lot of the pharmaceutical companies who are working in pain and oncology particularly in the not too distant future.
And Dr. Stewart, I don't know if you can answer this question, but I'll ask it anyway. When do you think you will see licensing and royalty fees in the future?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. So it'll really be from that, it'll either be from the insomnia trial, which will be completed around the end of the year. So we'd expect to do a license very soon after that. It would have milestones, an upfront milestone, and milestones as they go to market, and then a royalty once they take that through to sales. In terms of the cancer side, we may do a preclinical license on the cancer, meaning we might license one of the programs in breast cancer or pancreatic to another larger biotech or pharmaceutical company to take forward with an upfront milestones as they do the clinical trials and royalties as well. So really the answer to that is early next year.
Okay. Next question. It's very expensive to conduct R&D and clinical trials. Do you have enough cash?
For those programs we've pointed out here, we do. They're fully budgeted and funded. For the programs beyond that, we'll be either using our milestone payments from licensing or we'll be raising more cash at a significantly higher market cap, I would hope.
Next question, will you be looking in the future to find and study CBD's possible improvements in physical performance?
Yeah, I think that was a very interesting area. I never say never to anything. It is not in our pipeline at the moment. But look, in terms of physical performance, sports enhancement and things, it may well be something that we look at down the track, but not initially. Really the sleep, the dermatology and the cancer is our initial indications that we're looking at. And of course we've got a lot to do in those to make this a very valuable company.
Next question. This question is concerning, I'm trying to read the question here. So I guess what they're asking, Dr. Washer, is that does your R&D in clinical trials include researching why the causes of cancer? So I guess that's what they're asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. Look, cancer is a very complex disease. When we study one type of cancer, we find there's certain genetics behind that and causes, and then another type can be a completely different thing. I mean, they all result in this cell proliferation, which is uncontrollable, which is the definition of cancer. But yeah, look, in the breast cancer, we'll be looking at more how our medicine is stopping the tumor growing. So we're looking at the mechanism of action of the cannabis medicine on the breast cancer. So we'll elucidate at least one part of how we're blocking that. Not overall, we haven't got the money or funds or scope. A lot of far bigger, smarter people than us are doing that basic research in what makes the cancer arrive in the first place.
And I don't know if you can answer this question, Dr. Washer, but many American companies are going public in Australia versus the U.S. Why is that? I don't know if you can answer that.
No, look, I'll have a guess at it. I think it is really around the federal government acceptance. I mean, there's, unfortunately, the United States federal government is very unclear about its intentions and acceptance of medicinal cannabis compared to the Australian government, for example. So it is completely legal here. There's a defined process where in the United States it seems to be state-by-state approval rather than a federal government approval. So I think that's attracted people to the Australian stock exchange.
Gotcha. Next question. why does Big Pharma contract out R&D and clinical trials?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm sure people in Big Pharma ask this all the time. So every time Big Pharma, they've done this many times, they've set up research divisions and they hire scientists and they contract with universities. Every time Big Pharma do that, they end up spending a lot of money and getting very little result. It seems that the entrepreneurial cutting-edge scientists don't want to work within Big Pharma and those constraints. So the little biotechnology companies are more attractive to those types of individuals, and in the biotech land we can take a greater risk and be very fast on our feet, where Big Pharma basically isn't quick enough or nimble enough to fund that sort of cutting-edge research. So they tend to like biotechnology companies, let them do it, and then pay a lot of money for the results at the end of the day.
Well, that concludes our Q&A, Dr. Washer. We got several questions about the ADRs. One comment was, they wanted to purchase the ADRs before the stock started going up. What is the stock price now in Australia?
At the moment, it sounds weird, but it's a 3.3 cent stock. Now, well, this is a very common thing in Australia. We have lots of shares on issue. So that gives us a market capitalisation of that sort of $20 million range. So really the only way to purchase stock at the moment is direct from the ASX. So you really need a broker that can deal with ASX listed stocks. That ADR side is not in place, and I don't think we'll have that in place for at least another year.
Okay. If you could, again, to reiterate, if you can get that list to me, maybe we could probably attach it to your profile in the Cannabis Investor magazine at the end. So maybe if you can look into that, because I think that after the profile in the magazine, you're probably going to get a lot of investors that want to purchase the stock. So, but that concludes our presentation. Dr. Washer, any last comments regarding Zelda Therapeutics?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And so, look, the final comment I'd make is clinical data takes all of these new medical forefront technologies to real medicines, and that's an important thing. And I would say, I hope there's more and more Zelda therapeutic types out there that are actually running proper clinical trials in the future, because it's a very valuable medicinal source.
And last thing, can Jason Peterson help potential investors?
He absolutely could, yep.
And who is Jason Peterson? One of our
yeah, so he's on the board. Jason Peterson is on the board of Zelda Therapeutics, and he is the guy, investment banker and broker, one of the leading ones in Australia, that looks after our company down here in Australia as well. So he's Australian based, but I will get his contact details through as well. He's an absolute perfect point of contact.
Okay, make sure we get his information. We'll put it in the company profile in the magazine, so that'll be out next week.
Wonderful, yep.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Washer. We really appreciate your presentation. That concludes our presentations for today, and our next presentations will be the last Thursday in March. Thank you, Dr. Washer.
Thanks, Stewart. Thanks, everyone.